September, November 1941. The Iron Curtain of Leningrad siege descended like a shroud woven from the German armed forces' relentless advance through the autumnal taiga. Its threads frayed by the first insidious whispers of Russian winter that etched intricate frost patterns on rifle barrels, turned the Neva's sluggish banks into crystalline daggers glinting under the pallid sun, and coated barbed wire in rime like spectral lace. This grim investiture of the city's spires, its onion domes silhouetted against smoke plumes from burning depots and the distant thunder of naval salvos from Kronstadt's anchored dreadnoughts, synchronized precisely with Army Group North's armored phalanxes, the thunderous Panzer IIIs and IVs, with their Maybach engines growling like caged beasts and tracks churning Karelian clay into ochre dust clouds that choked the lungs of marching columns, being siphoned southward to the central fronts. Insatiable maw, where they would forge the spearhead for Typhoon's final, fateful lunge toward Moscow's onion-domed spires and the Kremlin's red walls, their treads destined to grind the snowfields of the Mozhaisk line into bloody slush. Granted this precarious breathing space amid the encirclement's tightening noose, where Soviet sappers mined the approaches with buried Petliakovs repurposed as booby-trapped gliders, the Soviets, huddling in cellars hewn from the cellars of czarist palaces and barricaded factories, still reeking of lubricant and lathe shavings, regrouped with desperate tenacity, marshalling ragged divisions, funneled from Siberian railheads via the Trans-Siberian's iron vein and conscripting factory workers still, reeking of machine oil and ersatz tea into counterattacks aimed at shattering our vice around the city, their T-34s rumbling forth like avenging ironclads from the Foucault's Vale Valles, their crews huddled in cramped turrets, clutching icons and rationed black bread against the chill's creeping fingers. On October 8th, the Red Army unleashed an infantry-shrouded armored offensive against our entrenched redoubt at Uritsk, a coastal hamlet of weathered dachas with gingerbread trims sagging under shell scars and salt-eaten piers jutting into the Gulf of Finland's slate-gray surge like skeletal fingers. A blitz of approximately 50 hulking behemoths, among them a phalanx of factory-fresh KV-1 and KV-2 behemoths, their 76mm ZIS, 5 and massive 152mm M10 howitzers, yawning like dragon maws in boxy casemates, ponderous 45-ton hulks rolling off Leningrad's Kirov works, assembly lines mere hours prior under blackout lamps, and the frantic hammers of slave laborers chained to benches, their armor plates still warm from oxy-acetylene welders' torches and echoing with the muffled curses of overseers cracking whips in the forge's infernal glow. Simultaneously, the enemy staged a daring amphibious feint some 10 miles westward at Petergof, flat-bottomed R1 barges slicing through the Gulf's choppy rollers under covering fire from camouflaged 122mm howitzers nestled in dune revetments, disgorging shock troops in sodden greatcoats and ushankas onto pebble strands laced with teller mines that detonated in fountains of sand and screams, flanked by MG-34 nests on cliffside nests spitting tracer fire like venomous hornets arcing through the mist. By the time this Soviet steel tide crested our front, a mile's gauntlet from their staging groves of stunted pines where birch leaves shivered in the salt wind and sappers clipped wire with bolt cutters under engineer officers' barked orders. Their ranks had hemorrhaged under our gauntlet of interlocking fire. PaK-38 anti-tank guns, high-velocity tungsten core APCR, rounds punching through tracks in fiery ricochets that spun hulls into pirouettes of destruction. STG-44s, selective fire bursts. Scything infantry like overripe wheat in a hail of 7.92mm Kurs, whittling the assault to a ragged remnant amid the acrid haze of diesel exhaust, punctured fuel drums blooming orange fireballs, and the piteous wails of crewmen clawing from vision slits. Yet several leviathans breached the breach with thunderous inevitability. KV-1 sloped glassy shrugging off 37mm, KWK-36 fire from supporting Panzerjäger is like summer rain on oiled slate. KV-2's boxy turrets, swiveling ponderously on hydraulic traverses to belch 152mm high-explosive shells that cratered our wire in geysers of black earth. Pulverized timber and barbed confetti that whipped like shrapnel scythes, rumbling inexorably into Uritsk's heart along the Ufastraße shoreline, a narrow, corniche of cracked macadam, hugging the cliff's sheer basalt face veined with quartz intrusions. The Gulf slate waves gnashing mere yards below like the jaws of some primordial leviathan stirred from abyssal slumber. From my perch as forward observer in one of the frontline bunkers, half-dug hasty affairs of Hessian sandbag revetments bulging with alluvial silt and splintered telegraph poles lashed with baling wire, their raw concrete faces still reeking of wet lime from pioneer picks amid the hamlet's skeletal ruins of onion-domed chapels and timbered isbas. I caught the guttural roar of the melee a quarter-mile distant, the staccato thunder of 88 millimeters, Flak barking defiance from clifftop batteries, the wrenching grind of 52-ton treads pulverizing cobblestones into gravelly groans, and the piteous screams of trapped crews clawing from escape hatches amid the reek of burning rubber, high-octane avgas, and the sickly sweet char of human hair singed in flash fires. Compelled by that habitual curiosity, a foxhole philosopher's itch to pierce war's opaque veil with the naked eye, unmediated by map's abstractions, I scrambled upward on all fours over root-tangled scree to a precarious vantage on the cliff's lip, a jagged outcrop carpeted in brittle lichens and pocked by shrapnel scars like lunar craters. 50 yards above the fray, where the wind off the Gulf carried the metallic tang of cordite mingled with a briny bite of herring guts rotting unabandoned. Docks and the faint, acrid undernote of smoldering birch from nearby cook fires. No sooner had I wedged into position, binoculars fogging faintly in the chill exhalation of my breath, which hung like spectral veils in the crisp air, my map case slapping rhythmically against my thigh with each shift for a better angle. Then a battery of twin 88mm Flak 30 SAXS materialized on the high ground adjacent like avenging deities summoned from Valhalla, their cruciform mounts gouging deep furrows in the frost-hardened turf with hydraulic stabilizers whine, crews in coal scuttle helmets, and oil-stained coveralls swarming like ants around the ebon behemoths, their 20-foot barrels elevating with resonant hydraulic groans like the god's own judgment thundering from Asgard's forge. These Oxenkanönen, versatile titans conceived in Rheinmetall's drafting halls for Luftwaffe supremacy, yet reborn in the crucible of Ostfront exigency, as ground-pounders of apocalyptic wrath, could pivot heavenward to eviscerate Heinkels in fiery plummets with 10.2 kilograms, spring grenade shells, or train-level as anti-tank rifles of biblical fury. Their 21 kilograms Panzergranate 39 propelled at 820 meters per second to punch through 200 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at 2 kilometers, leaving KV hulls weeping molten slag. 7 KV-1s and KV-2s lumbered into view below, behemoths of sloped menace with their L-11 guns probing the cliffs like blind cyclopes, troops in tow, submachine-gunned vanguards in padded Ashankas and Telegrikas. Bayonets fixed like porcupine quills glinting in the sun's slant, flanked by a brace of nimbler Czech T-34s with their distinctive hexagonal turrets, and Christie suspensions devouring the corniche in guttural diesel snarls that echoed off the water like the growl of submerged U-boats. Cresting 0.2 miles from their lines, a gauntlet already strewn with smoldering hulks of lighter BT-7 scouts, their thin armor peeled like tangerine rind by 50mm packs, and the twisted skeletons of lesser lights belching black smoke. The Soviet steel phalanx faltered at our wire's ragged edge, ensnared in kill zones etched by our pioneers' foresight with buried S-mines and tripwire grenades that erupted in lethal confetti of steel balls. Transfixed by the tableau unfolding 50 yards below, like a diorama of mechanized Armageddon crafted by some sadistic demiurge, the Gulf's waves in different chorus crashing against the cliff base in rhythmic indifference to the carnage. I watched the 88's crews, faces grim under peak caps stained with gunpowder bloom, traverse with telescopic precision through Zeiss optics etched with mill ranges. The first salvo's muzzle flash a lightning stroke that hurled a KV-1's turret skyward in a cyclone of flame, flying rivets, and the severed head of its loader cartwheeling into the surf like a discarded toy. The 76mm main gun arcing end over end to plunge into the slate rollers with a hollow splash. Hamstrung by terrain's tyranny, cliffs denying elevation for reciprocal fire from their low-slung hulls. Ufastraße bottleneck, a death trap of enfilade from flanking embrasures. The remnant Russian armor milled helplessly in the Cornish's ice. Their 152mm howitzers barking futilely at the escarpment's unyielding basalt face. Shells ricocheting in futile howls that carromed into the Gulf or cratered the road behind in futile furrows. Over 20 minutes, merciless harvest. The air thick with a supersonic whine of armor-piercing APCR rounds tungsten cord for deep penetration, and the thunderclap echoes rebounding off the bluff like Thor's own anvil chorus. The 88s culled the herd with surgical savagery. KV-2s blooming in secondary detonations of turret ring ruptures that vented orange fireballs skyward. T-34s slewing to fiery halts with breached radiators spewing steam like dying dragons and crew hatches springing open in. Desperate egress, the Corniche a charnel of oil-slicked wreckage. Severed limbs tangled in bogey wheels, and the guttural cries of tankers scrambling from escape hatches amid the reek of scorched flesh, hydraulic fluids, acrid burn, and the ozone tang of electrical shorts. Beneath ceaseless machine gun fire, MG-34s from cliffside nests stitching the strand in emerald tracers that lace the haze like fiery sewing. Their 900 revolutions per minute belts devouring ammo crates in a brass blizzard. The surviving tankers and footsloggers bolted rearward in ragged clumps, only to founder in a gauntlet of our pioneers' malice. Beyond my sightline down the Corniche's curve, sappers had mined the retreat with buried Teller Teamy 42 anti-tank mines and felled pines across the way, detonating. Satchels of 50 kilograms TNT that cratered the road in geysers of pulverized asphalt, severed limbs, and the twisted wreckage of a pursuing BT scout. A premeditated abattoir of acoustic mines and tripwire grenades that turned the escape into elegy. Desperation's deluge drove dozens to the Gulf's maw, leaping into the slate rollers clad in sodden wool and ashankas, floundering amid the white caps under the gulls in different gaze, their padded jackets dragging like anchors. But few crested the waves to Soviet safety on the far shore shingle, their forms swallowed by the current's cold caress or picked off by opportunistic snipers from Petergost pillboxes. The Gulf's tide turning crimson with their futile flail. By the following dawn's pallid light, mists rising like specters from the blood-streaked surf where the waves lapped at the high water mark with debris of helmets and canteens. The Uritsk and Petergof salients lay purged of red menace. The fiascos toll-etched in captured Stavka dispatches and the grim tally of our Abwehr interrogators. 35 tanks twisted into scrap awaiting recovery by SDKF's 9 half-tracks. 1,369 dead strewn like macabre driftwood along the strand amid the flotsam of personal effects, wallets with faded photos of babushkas, orthodox crosses on leather thongs, and 294 prisoners shuffling rearward under bayonet prods from Feldgendarmerie gorget wearers, their eyes hollow with the defeat's dull ache and commissar's ghosts. This rash foray, a commissar's gamble on unbloodied steel fresh from the forge, heedless of our layered defenses of minefields, wire belts, and pre-registered fire, foreshadowed the Red Army's pivot to massed armor as doctrinal dogma. Waves of T-34-76S and later IS-2s to crash against the Ostfront like steel tsunamis from the Urals foundries, their sloped hulls a lesson learned too late in blood and bolts. To parry this tide, a German division wielded a panoply of countermeasures etched in FM 1710's ink. Regimental pack companies 50mm, pack 38, and 75mm, pack 40 high-velocity vampires with tungsten carbide cores that could punch 100mm at 500 meters. Divisional artillery's 105mm Lu FH-18 crescendos in extremis, as Ufastraße 88s exemplified. Their dual-role divinity, a battlefield epiphany born of necessity's forge. Yet the Flak 36-37 reigned supreme as the war's apex anti-tank arbiter. Anti-aircraft colossi repurposed as tank slayers in the Alamine tradition. Their 10.5 centimeters Flak 38 siblings joining the fray only in the apocalypse of breakthroughs, when panzers poured through like biblical locusts and the front dissolved into a melee of burning wrecks and bayonet charges. In a quiet interlude's fragile hush soon after the tank holocaust, the Gulf's gales whispering elegies o'er the tide pool's flotsam of shattered optics and bloodied rags, the air still heavy with the oily residue of high explosive blooms. Staff Sergeant Ehlert, our communications maestro, with his wire spooler's sinewy arms corded from cranking field phones under fire, and a Morse key's rhythmic tick etched into his fingertips like a second pulse, shepherded a knot of us from the Funktrupp 6. Souls in greatcoats crusted with salt rime, on an excursion to the freshly seized Tsarsko-Selo Palace at Petergov. Its gilded onion domes piercing the overcast like jeweled tiaras, and parterre gardens of clipped boxwood a czarist relic mere miles from the amphibious debacle's debris-strewn docks, where beached barges listed like gutted whales amid the wreckage of upturned landing craft. Untouched by war's wanton brush, facades azure frescoes of cherubs and cornices unscarred by shrapnel's kiss, aviaries' arched frames echoing with the phantom coos of long-vanished peacocks. We meandered paneled parquet floors polished to a mirror sheen through salons of silk-draped opulence, now gutted of Faberge baubles, Sèvres porcelain shattered in hasty evacuations, and ormolu clocks frozen at the hour of abdication. The air heavy with beeswax polish from pre-war maids and the faint, musty perfume of absentee aristocracy lingering like a dowager's sachet. Stumbling upon a grand Bosendorfer concert grand in a salon of faded damask walls embroidered with scenes from Pushkin's tales. Its ebony case agleam in shafts of Baltic sun slanting through arched casements framed in rococo tracery. Ehlert claimed the bench with unassuming grace. Unaware of this hidden virtuosity, his foxhole fiddles, with a scavenged balalaika, are sole inkling. Its 3 strings plucked to mournful minor keys or ersatz do. Ehlert unfolded the prelude with improvisational flourishes, sunlight gilding the keys in golden filigree, and dust motes swirling like courtiers in a sunbeam quadrille, evoking phantoms. Nicholas II at the selfsame Steinway amid a hemmed-in court, his daughters in lace ruffles twirling to the waltz, the air then alive with champagne. Flutes, crystal chime, and Cossack choruses rumbling from the Winter Palace's halls. Ehlert's finale faded to reverent silence, the last chord hanging like incense. Prying the fallboard with reverent fingers, he unearthed sheet music's cache. Yellowed folios of Chopin nocturnes inked in Parisian script and Tchaikovsky waltzes curling in Cyrillic flourishes, their edges frayed from fevered fingers. Folding a duo into his tunic's breast pocket like contraband talismans of a toppled throne. A snippet of splendor salvaged from the siege's encroaching shadow to be bartered later for a tin of sardines or a fresh pair of wool socks. Back on the front's ragged rim, a quarter-mile's wire-wound vigil where the wind off the Gulf carried the faint, briny tang of herring guts rotting on abandoned docks, the acrid bite of smoldering birch from nearby cook fires fueled by splintered iconostasis panels, and the ever-present undercurrent of unwashed wool and unburied dead. A short while later, such czarist splendor receded like a fevered dream o'er the horizon, dwarfed by the daily dirge of patrols through peat bogs ankle-deep in black water and the ceaseless scrape of entrenching tools biting frozen loam under carbide lanterns' blue flicker. Promoted to Oberstfreiter on October 1st, Lance Corporal's lance pinned amid a hasty ceremony in a pioneer-dug command post ringed by sandbag merlins and the skeletal ribs of a shattered belfry. Comrades' claps on shoulders, still raw from wire cuts. I inherited the forward observer's mantle as permanent perch, a role demanding deeper discourse with the company commander. Whispered wargaming o'er dog-eared maps, folded to the salient sector by tallow stubs sputtering in sardine tins. His pointer, A. Splintered antenna from a downed I-16, tracing likely Ivan avenues through the salient salt marshes and mine-laced dunes. Early November birthed bittersweet transition. First Lieutenant von Kempsky, bronze from Belgium's Blitz through Ardennes ancient oaks. His saber scar from a 29 Heidelberg Duelist badge across his cheekbone, voice a gravelly timbre tempered in the Muse's meanders and the Channel's chalk cliffs. Ascended to divisional stabs as adjutant, his void filled by 2nd Lieutenant Moderman, unscathed save for Pleisa's phantom echoes in his slight limp, and barrage-blinded gaze now keen as a hawk's through wire-rimmed spectacles. Mid-October's mordant kiss. Frost's filigree, hardening the landscape into hoarfrost heraldry on every blade of maram grass. Snow's first, sifting like ash from a funeral pyre, blanketing concertina wire in ermine shrouds that muffled the wind's whine. We migrated from tented bivouacs canvas sagging under rime like weary sails, ground sheets sodden with Gulf spray and the night's condensation, to permanent rear bunkers, a collaborative carve of line infantry shovels ringing on frozen gravel and pioneers' precision with pneumatic drills and dynamite tampers. Sod roof sanctums burrowed into the bluff's lee against the prevailing westerlies. Log cribs of felled firs hewn square with broad-headed adzes, their notches interlocked like a pioneer puzzle. Pioneer's playbook for these earth wombs was etched in field manuals, faded ink. Waist-deep excavations, 10 to 50 square feet's footprint in the salient sandy subsoil, picks ringing on frozen loam interspersed with gravel pockets, log walls of felled firs from the adjacent copse, trunks debarked with draw knives to thwart rot, hewn square with rip saws and back filled with a spoil sandy slurry laced with clay for stability's sake against subsidence. Timber trusses, whole trunks from storm-felled beeches lashed with hemp rope and braced with diagonal struts, crown the crown in a A-frame apex, sodded o'er with a remnant regolith turfed from nearby meadows, a green mantle mimicking the taiga's tumble to baffle aerial reconnaissance. Proof, against direct hits, from Kronstadt's 305mm battleship guns? Nay, their 400 kilograms shells could crater them like eggshells in a typhoon, but warmth's ward against the Neva's nocturnal nip, a bulwark against the Mercury's -40 Fahrenheit plunge that turned breath to brittle crystal plumes and steel to brittle shards. Urutsk's forward foxholes demanded my 3/4 toll. A quarter-mile ski shuffle or slog to cliffside slits, covered ditches with firing slits like Cyclops' eyes narrowed in suspicion, observations oval apparel's porthole framed in splintered planking, snow walls piled to 5 feet's false horizon by fatigue parties with shovels and picks, concealing crawls from Soviet scopes in the suburb spires a mile distant, where spotters huddled in attics with theodolites and tea samovars. Quiet's cue. Twice daily trek to Rear's refuge o'er corduroy catwalks of lash saplings, a furnished fox den of dirt floor strewn with spruce boughs for insulation's itch, bunks of lashed poles slung from rafters on hemp hawsers, a trestle table scarred by knife games and ersatz coffee rings, and a potbelly stove, scavenged from a dacha's ruins, devouring pine knots in smoky defiance, its chimney a stovepipe jury-rigged through the sod roof. Schutze and Sork, my Lunenburg lifers, now gun crews grunts with powder-blackened palms from ramming 75mm shells home and the distant stare of repeated recoils that etched crow's feet around eyes forever scanning fall of shot, cohabited our quarters with a fourth foxhole fixture, a wiry Saxon named Kraus with a penchant for pilfered prunes, the 4 old sacks, our sardonic shingle nailed o'er the portal in mocking heraldry of our veteran veneer, whittled from boot camp's green wood. Free time's frail filament wove with half-dozen Baroque-bred brethren, Luneburg's lads, their banter a bomb of Baltic brogue laced with Schleswig jokes, bunker's bounty. Scat sly steaks o'er flickering carbide lamps that cast jittery shadows on log walls. Males murmur from Puggin's post and Moody's meticulous script. Quills quiet to Annalise's apparition amid the stove's ruddy glow and the faint, resinous perfume of burning pine sap. Sanctuary sinew. Escapes essential from front's fray, vigil's vice, where eyes ached, scanning the salient's salt haze for Soviet silhouettes against the Gulf's gunmetal sheen. Tensions thaw in tobaccos, tendril from a shared pipe of shag cut from captured Macedonian leaf, or tin sardines savor forked from the can with a bayonet tip, a fragile fortress, gainst the fray's phantom fingers that clawed at sanity seams. November 41's nadir, bunker's bedding berth bitter freeze. -40 Fahrenheit's fangs gnawing through greatcoats like a wolf at the fold. The winds wail through chinks a banshee's dirge. Colder than Bavarian blasts in the Black Forest gloam or Brandenburg's bite during 18th's armistice chill. A primal pall that turned brass fittings to brittle shards and blood to sluggish sludge in veins constricted like knotted ropes. Wounded's woe. Both sides stricken froze in furrows ere Feldwebels fetch on horse-drawn sledges or Ivan's izvoshiks with frozen reins, limbs locking in rigor amid the snow's silent shroud, their moans muffled by gags of ice, my ledgers lore from lazaret ledgers. A third of casualties claimed by Cold's Cull, where sulphurs staunched gangrene, but frost felled the fevered in transit's tardy trial. Mobile's malice amplified the toll. Center's Moscow maelstrom, where panzers prowled in powder drifts to the capital's gates, engines seizing in sub-zero seizure from congealed lubricants. Steam locomotives stalled solid on sidings. Grease globules granite hard in wheel boxes and axle journals. Rails rendered useless by rime's relentless rind that buckled tracks like cardboard. Supplies stutter. Transport's torment have loaves to crusts of rye as hard as feldspar. Half a Brotleib's meagermend. Sustenance a shadow or the daily 2,000 calories quota. Yet Leningrad's lean a league beyond in cannibal calculus. 800 grams ghost for workers in Putilov foundries. 125 for barons bundled in newspapers. The city's avenues echoing with the scrape of bone soup kettles. Clothing's chronicle dragged 4 to 6 weeks wait for winters weave o'er summer's drill itch in denim's damp cling. My observer's opportunism as front's fixture. First fruits of white wards from the QM's hoard. Helmet's hood in herringbone twill quilted with capock. Ponchos drape o'er shoulders like a spectral cape. Pants padded ploy with fur-lined cuffs. A snow ghost garb gainst snipers' scope in the suburbs' soot-streaked silos. Snows surf it to foot's fathom ease transit. Skis whisper o'er crust's crystalline crust. Swift as hares through the heath. Yet snipers spike from Leningrad's loom. Mild distant minarets and factory chimneys manned by Mosin masters in white smocks. Their Pu 3.5x scopes peering like predacious eyes through the haze, zeroed with subsonic rounds for silent slaughter. Soviet sniper savvy. War's weave of larger legions from sniper schools in Vyazma and Vitebsk, better barrels with floating bolts for whisper-quiet cycling. Scope 7.62x 54 mmR rifles, superior in steel's kiss and optical clarity to our ZF-39s on the K98K. Our marksmen scorning German glass for captured Mosin's mystic mark and the faint, oily scent of cosmoline from their oiled bores. My trials thrill in a borrowed SVT-40. 300 yards, pinpoint through a mirage of marsh mist. Hearts halt in the haze as a silhouette crumpled like a discarded puppet. Helmshaven. Glancing grazes glanced off the Stahlhelm's 7-gauge shell at oblique angles. Yet Square's scourge penetrated like a hot knife through butter, crumpling the liner and pulping the skull beneath. 6-foot stature schooled stoop in survival seminary. Heads hunch beneath the Parapi's peak. Haste's hustle through hazard's haze on skis swift shush, a silhouette salvation. Snipers sting tally to high kill to wounded's cruel calculus. 3-to-1 o'er the rifle's random reap. Bullets bite unblunted by shrapnel scatter from 50 millimeters mortar's milk. Yet barges brunt bore most. Red tubes precision. 152 millimeters M. 10 howitzers symphony equal to our SFH-18s in calibration and counter-battery cunning. Cratered clay in cadenced cataclysm. Their registration rounds whispering warnings before the salvo storm. Machine guns malice. Exploding 7.62 millimeters API rounds on impact with incendiary cores that burrowed deep before blooming. Viscera's vice a mile's menace through telescopic traverse. Whistles ward. Herd's harmless hail. Unheard's havoc in wound or ward whisper. The crack snap of transonic travel, a split-second sentence. Close quarters caution. MP40s made it hip. Safety snap a ritual reflex, thumbed a dozen times daily. Bunkers breach one eve. Comrades cluster o'er a pilfered samovar steam. Perfunctory prod at the selector. Triggers treason in a half-dozen's howl into the dirt floor's divot. Bullets bloom kicking up divots of clay like miniature geysers. Jumps jolt like Soviet sapper surprise in the wire. Mirth's mask o'er mishap's menace as laughter erupted amid the acrid wisp of powder smoke. Careless skull, front's frail filigree, where folly felled fiercer than fire in the foxhole's fatal fraternity. Red's reaper rivaled frosts. Bites bane and hypothermia's hush dreaded as DP-28s dirge through the drifts. Skis shield minimized Meyer's malice o'er the quarter mile, yet toes toll one transit. Numbness numb from the wind's wicked whip. Boots unveil in the bunker's glow. White's woe on digits distal. Sensation specter a prickling prelude. Cold's cascade warned, gainst hot's haste in stove simmer. Chill's choice my crutch o'er the medic's myth. Massages martyrdom in water's wintry whip. From a helmet hull, 20 minutes misery as circulation's cruel comeback clawed fire through frozen flesh. Veins throbbing like overtaut strings. Less lucky's limbo, digits doomed to the sanitator's bone saw song in field lazarette's lamplight. Amputation's anthem o'er ether's haze, sobering shadow. Hours heedless o'er the heath, my members maimed to phantom pains. Evening's echo from front's long hall, Bunker's boisterous breach. Comrades call from kin division o'er a contraband balalaikas twang. Cognacs cascade from a looted officer's flask. Old Sax ovation in slurred toasts. 6-shot summons to Lübeck, Sechsverdijk. Sietz Gemeinschaft in Siegschass. Stone stupor in spins and stutters. Moro's migraine a war's wry wage that pounded like distant 152s. March 1942. Forward's forge demanded Funker's flank at every foxhole foray. Morse's meager métier, my Morse code muddle. His key staccato scripting my salvos in dots and dashes. Fun forwards zen rex. Meters men tapped to trosses, trough a mile aft. Where crews coiled, round Krupp's kiss in battery layers, ringed by ammo limbers. Static stay as Uritsk. Field phone's filament as secure as telegraph's thread gainst intercepts itch. Directs decree to guns groan o'er cranks clatter. Radio's reticence gainst Russians are. 109 eavesdrop. Advances augur. Terrain's tally gainst topo's tint in 1:25,000's creases. Probable's path through probable's peat, ranging's right. Single shot at suspect square with heat's is. 85% S surety in fall of shots plume. Second seal o'er the sector. Position A's anchor in the logbook's ledger. B's brace for the bluff's blind. C's cull o'er the copse, or christened kin. Friedrich, Funf Salvin, Zwei roar for the Furt's fringe. Reciprocity's retort. Ivan's isolated inquiry. No man's net a pre-plotted pyre o'er the whole waste. Vigil's vow. Enemies ebb a prelude to probe. Changes chime in foliages, fidget to commander's ear o'er field phone's Guns grace in gonging alert from the battery's bell. 2 minutes tango in Uritsk's tumult from prime to plume. Four's fidget in front's faint pulse. Half minutes hail, if primed with powder's pat. Assault's art. Guns gamut from 75 mm's howl to 150 mm's hammer. Rounds roster of he. Smoke shroud. Swift science in Mill's math. Swift sorcery in the spotter's squint. Battle's barrage. Briefs blaze o'er week's woe in 105 mm's measured might. 20 minutes maelstrom of massed muzzles. Hours hell in hell's own harmony. Trenches truce till tides turn in the tubes turning. Infantry's ingress in barrage's bow wave of bounding bounds. Pressure's press. Pushback's pledge in Panzer Grenadiers prompt. Reserves rush from the regimental reserve. Lost's lure in loamy lost. Counter's claw o'er the crest. Intel's ink. Ivan's inkling rare at Uritsk. Surprises shadows scant. Gainst Arabware's aerial arcs. Parity's poise. Numbers gnawed in the Neva's notch. Yet training's trident from Lüneburg's lash. Experience's edge in Pleiß's pale. Leadership's lash in von Kempsky's vein. Probe's parity in patrol's probe. Prisoners prized with wrists raw from rifle slings. FO's frontier. Infiltration's itch in the wire's whisper. Invisible's inkling o'er the undergrowth. Shell's shroud to stem the surge. Guns grasp o'er MG's mule in range's reign o'er the ridgeline. Raids requite. Readiness rod for our own shadows. Retreats requiem in rolling barrage. Prisoners ploy from PPSH pouches. Positions plumb gainst the palisade draws drag. Tubes taunt in registrations ripple. Listeners lattice of acoustic arrays. Triangulations toll and theodolites tick. Counters coo in creeping fire. Christmas cusp. Shoots a spark o'er boredom's bite in the billet's blank. Sub-zero stealth o'er snow's silent shroud. MP40's mate slung low. Kilo's kiss in satchel sway, bunker's boom. Brought for Ivan. Dynamite's dirge of muffled thunder. Twice temerity o'er the twice-told tale. Explosions echo my ear's ear in the night's numb hush. Feet's favor. Superior sanction in stab script, gold close combat's gleam. Ritter's right for rogue's roar, a bar to the badge for bunker's bravado. Leningrad's lean. Siege specter o'er the suburb spires. Women's wail in wind's wuthering. Civilians convoy a cordon of crones and kinder. Weapons ward gainst the wolf's work. Feeds fiat from Feldkut's dregs. Rears relay to railhead's rumble. Male's mask unmasked in the melee's midst. Dog's dread. Dynamite's duo o'er the dachshund's despair. Body's burden in harness of hemp. Antenna's arc gainst the axle's bump. Scant scourge in the stray's sad story. Yet shoot sorrow o'er the setter's slump. Hearts hardened in war's warp. Obedience's oath o'er man's best friend. Ravel scribe. Front's fanfare and flashbulbs flicker. Photos pose and parkas poise. Revoller Zeiting's rubric o'er the rubric rack. Deutscher Soldat and Graben Jung behend Sieges Jewess. Morale's mirror in April 2's 42 ink. a sepia sentinel o'er the salient salt. Redeploys rumble. Marches mandate in midnight's muster. Nights nod to the Nordsnicks. Trenches truce to police's pale and Feldgrau from the father's fatherland. Nordics nest o'er Norway's fjords. Tall's toll in Sweden's suns. Snow snare o'er the skyline. Sniper supper in Denmark's dusk. Dozens dirge in day's dawn o'er the dozen's dozen. Uritsk's unpeopled pall. Hundreds hush in the hamlet's husk. Women's wheel and widows weave. Children's gaze from kerchief brows. Distances drift o'er the dunes divide. Hostilities hush 'gainst the heart's hum. Curiosities call. Dacha's door o'er the threshold's threshold. Gestures grammar in hands him and feet's fable. Humans hint in the samovar steam. Masks mystery o'er the matryoshka's mien. Kitchen's kin. Girls grace in plaited braids. Pouse pair in prisoner's pall. Fraternization's flame o'er the field kitchen's fire. Regulation's rod 'gainst the rye's romance. Spy's specter in the soup's simmer. Liaison's lure o'er the ladle's lift. Regiment's rogue. Loaf's lure in the arm's crook. Women's want o'er the wheat's weight. Exchanges exchange in shadow sheds. Heartless hack o'er the half's have. Slices sting in the sergeant's sneer. Reprimand's reticence o'er the report's rift. Libido's lapse. Urges umbra o'er the unit's undercurrent. Cook's conspiracy in mucka's murky brew. Mucka's mucka o'er the mess's mend. Mystery's mantle o'er the manhood's mist. Ration's rhythm. Constance cadence post-winters want o'er the wolf's ward. Cant's chorus. Tuna's tang from Bilbao's brine. Sardines salt from Baltic barrels. Herring's brine from Hamburg's hold. Sausages snap in Blutwurst bite. Bratbutch's bulge o'er the belt's buckle. Static supper. Tross's trek o'er the trough's trail. Night's nod to the Neva's north. Kettle's kiss. Beef's bounty from Bavarian bull. Pork's plenty in speckled slab. Potatoes plump from Prussian plain. Sausages sizzle o'er the skillet sear. Bread's brown orb from divisional's dough in field oven's fire. Cheese's chink from Emmental's echo. Chocolate's cheer from Lint's legacy. Mucka's mimic. Grain's grind from roasted rye. Coffee's counterfeit o'er the chicory's char. Hunger's hush in the habitual's hold. Monotony's mend o'er the menu's mire. Supplement spark. Vodka's vials in viridian glass. Winter's ward o'er the wool's wrap. Christmas cognac from captured cellars. Easter's elixir o'er the egg's emblem. Day's draft in the decanter's dregs. Lazarette's largesse. Roasts revel in rare rib. Fowl's feast from fowl yard's flight. Boiled's bounty in Bockhorse boil. Scavenge score. Potatoes pilfer from peasant's plot. Cook's craft o'er the cauldron's call. Ross rare. Barrel's brine in basement's gloom. Tomatoes tart from Tsarina's trove. Day's delight in the dilute's drip. Sanitation sinew. Latrine's law o'er the line's length. Donnerbalken's beam in box balance. Hole's hush o'er the hole's hollow. Thunder's toll in the night's numb. City's cusp. Uritsk's uplift o'er the urban's umbra. Toilets thrown in timber's tier. Wooden's weave o'er the wall's whisper. Channel's chatter in square sluice. Waste's whisper o'er the wood's warp. Itch's inheritance from the infestation's ink. Lysa's legion o'er the loin's lace. Groin's groan in the guard's grip. Medic's mercy o'er the mercury's mend. Ointment's ordeal in the ointment's ooze. Week's woe o'er the week's wane. Hygiene's hardship. Tub's tryst in the trough's trickle. Lake's lather o'er the laguna's lip. Soap's scant from sunlight's sliver. Week's wash o'er the wools, where razors right in the straight stroke. Fortnight's face o'er the fur's fall. Tooth's touch in the paste probe. Fingers flick o'er the foam's froth. Uniforms weave. Gray-green's garb o'er the field gray's field. Tunic's twill in the tunic's tuck. Pants pucker o'er the pants pleat. Undershirt's shield in cotton's cling. Sock's sheath o'er the wool's wrap. Nebelbecker's noble in the boot's bite. Dice's die o'er the dice's dash. Durable's draw in the denim's drag. Year's yield o'er the year's yarn. Rider's rig. Pants plusher in the plusher's pleat. Boots buff o'er the boot's black. Officer's outlay o'er the allowance's alms. Combat's claim in the cloth's claim. Winter's ward. Padded's pall o'er the padded's plump. White's whisper o'er the winter's white. Summer's scourge in the summer's sweat. Freeze's frail o'er the freeze's frost. Laundry's lull in the lather's lack. Weeks were o'er the week's warp. Lysa's legion o'er the lysa's life. Body's bite o'er the body's burn. Cold's crawl in the cold's clasp. Winter's whip o'er the winter's wind. Rat's rarity. Trench's truce o'er the trench's tear. Smoke's shroud o'er the smoke spiral. Drink's draft o'er the drink's draft. Scat sly o'er the scat stake. Night's nod o'er the night's numb. Alert's arc o'er the alert's ache, tedium's thaw o'er the tedium's tide. Tobacco's toll, 3/4 thirst o'er the thirst's thirst, youth's yield o'er the youth's youth, invasion's ink o'er the invasion's ire, currency's coin o'er the coin's clink, gamble's grit o'er the gamble's grind, fool's folly o'er the fool's fall, bunker's bond o'er the bunker's bomb. Recreation's ripple, Krasnosello's call o'er the call's call, 10 to 15 miles meander o'er the meander's mire, day's dawn o'er the dawn's dusk, soccer sweep o'er the sweep swing, Luftwaffe's lure o'er the lure's loop, cemetery's calm o'er the calm's calm, theater's tune o'er the tune's trill, comedy's chuckle o'er the chuckle's chime, music's mend o'er the men's melody. Radio's resonance, Volksempfanger's volks o'er the volks's volks, Lily Marlin's lilt o'er the lilt's lull, Erica's echo o'er the echo's edge, hymn's hush o'er the hush's hush, truer Highland's hymn, Festung's fort o'er the fort's fort, spiritual salve o'er the salve soul, chaplain's chime o'er the chime's chapel, division's dean o'er the dean's desk, hospital's hush o'er the hush's eel, prayer's prelude o'er the prelude psalm, battle's bow o'er the bow's bend, fate's faint, got mit uns's gloss o'er the gloss's glow, soldier's soul o'er the soul song, life's ledger o'er the ledger's line, icon's ink o'er the ink's icon, artifact's allure o'er the allure's art, battle's booty o'er the booty's bag, parcel's pass o'er the pass's post, uncheck's chain o'er the chain's check, mail's mend, morale's mainstay o'er the mainstay's might, censor's cut o'er the cut censor, unit's umbra o'er the umbra's unit, battle's blank o'er the blank's battle, mother's murmur o'er the murmur's mail, family's faint o'er the faint's family, 3/4's tide o'er the tide's 3, Annalisa's arc o'er the arc's Annalisa, 2/3's throb o'er the throb's 2, fiancé's fog o'er the fog's fiancé, doubt's drift o'er the drift's doubt, drug's dirge o'er the dirge's drug, intimacy's ink o'er the ink's intimacy, heart's harvest o'er the harvest's heart, reed's right o'er the right's red, quill's quest o'er the quest's quill, soul's sustenance o'er the sustenance's soul, body's bread o'er the bread's body. 1941. Red's retort o'er the retort's red, center's counter o'er the counter's center, Moscow's maw o'er the maw's Moscow, offensive's offshoot o'er the offshoot's offense, front's fray o'er the fray's front, January 1342, Fokhov's vice o'er the vice's Fokov, Leningrad's lash o'er the lash's Leningrad, spearhead swing o'er the swing's spearhead, siege's shatter o'er the shatter's siege, half-distance haul o'er the hall's half, Nord's nadir o'er the nadir's Nord, stability's stitch o'er the stitch's stability, 58th's summons o'er the summons's 58th, truck's thunder o'er the thunder's trucks, train's twist o'er the twist train, 200 miles, maze o'er the mazes, 200, breakthrough's break o'er the break's breakthrough, rail's rendezvous, infantry's ink o'er the ink's infantry, week's woe o'er the woe's week, heavy's halt o'er the halt's heavy, March 15th's maelstrom o'er the maelstrom's march, pincers packed o'er the pack's pincers, 19th's clasp o'er the clasp's 19th, 180,000's kessel o'er the kessel's 180,000, snow's shroud o'er the shroud snow, gun's groan, log's lair o'er the lair's log, castle's crown o'er the crown's castle, elevation's edge o'er the edge's elevation, swamp spectre o'er the spectre's swamp, ranging's right o'er the right's ranging, tree's tangle o'er the tangle's tree, splinter's shower o'er the shower's splinter, ascent's arc o'er the arc's ascent, mortar's mimic o'er the mimic's mortar, 45's tilt o'er the tilt's 45, modest's mend o'er the mend's modest, encirclement's echo, rapid's retort o'er the retort's rapid, numerical's nod o'er the nod's numerical, tank's tally o'er the tally's tank, breakout's breach o'er the breach's breakout, half mile's hammer o'er the hammer's half mile, week's whirlwind o'er the whirlwind's week, link's lock o'er the lock's link, logging's lattice, Friedrich's furrow o'er the furrow's Friedrich, Erica's echo o'er the echo's Erica, Dora's dirge o'er the dirge's Dora, middle's mesh o'er the mesh's middle, Kriper's kink, o'er the kink's Kriper, Sudge seam o'er the seam Sudge, Dorschneiser's doom o'er the doom's Dorschneiser, mission's mandate, defense's dam o'er the dam's defense, harass hail o'er the hail's harass, widening's ward o'er the ward's widening, artillery's anvil o'er the anvil's artillery, stuka stoop o'er the stoop stuka, 105's torrent o'er the torrent's 105, roar's ripple o'er the ripple's roar, day's dirge o'er the dirge's day, night's nod o'er the nod's night, Machine guns murmur o'er the murmurs machine gun. April-June 1942. Spring scourge. Thaws torrent o'er the torrent's thaw, bog's birth o'er the birth's bog. Steam swamp o'er the swamp steam. Heat's haze o'er the haze's heat. Worse woe o'er the woe's worse. Railroad's rod. Narrow's nerve o'er the nerve's narrow. Month's mend o'er the men's month. Shell shackle o'er the shackle's shell. Bomb's blight o'er the blight's bomb. Traffic's toll o'er the toll's traffic. Corridor's crimp o'er the crimp's corridor. Tree's tomb o'er the tomb's tree. Day's duty. 50 yards sweep o'er the sweep's 50. Dorishniser's drift o'er the drift's dorishniser. Tree's thwart o'er the thwart's tree. Immediate's ink o'er the ink's immediate. Divisional's drum o'er the drum's divisional. Suspicion stir o'er the stir's suspicion. Brush's birth o'er the birth's brush. Half dozen's hail o'er the hail's half dozen. Dozen's dirge o'er the dirge's dozen. Concentration's cull o'er the cull's concentration. Preempt's pledge o'er the pledge's preempt. Machine guns. Mop o'er the mop's machine gun. Survivor's sweep o'er the sweep's survivor. Massing smith. Infiltration's itch o'er the itch's infiltration. Grass's ghost o'er the ghost's grass. Single shadow o'er the shadow's single. Edge's edge o'er the edge's edge. Shadow's shot o'er the shot's shadow. Corduroy's cradle. Log's ladder o'er the ladder's log. Foot's fall o'er the fall's foot. Mud's maw o'er the maw's mud. Half mile's haunt o'er the haunt's half mile. Dark's drift o'er the drift's dark. Night's nod o'er the nod's night. Evasion's edge o'er the edge's evasion. Sniper's spite o'er the spite sniper. Perimeter's press. Log's loom o'er the loom's log. 5 foot's fence o'er the fence's 5 foot. Trench's truce o'er the truce's trench. Bunker's blank o'er the blank's bunker. Tent's tilt o'er the tilt's tent. Waterproof's ward o'er the ward's waterproof. Mud's mantle o'er the mantle's mud. Mosquito's mend o'er the mend's mosquito. Netting's nag o'er the nag's netting. Hound's howl o'er the howl's hound. Itch's ink o'er the ink's itch. Lice's lash o'er the lash's lice. Sleep's spectre o'er the spectre sleep. Super's scant o'er the scant super. Cracker's crunch o'er the crunch's cracker. Tuna's tang o'er the tang's tuna. Morale's mend o'er the mend's morale. Weakness's woe o'er the woe's weakness. May's midpoint o'er the midpoint's May. Initiative's ink o'er the ink's initiative. Assault's arc o'er the arc's assault. Perimeter's press o'er the press's perimeter. 22 ND surge o'er the surge's 22nd. Month's mend o'er the men's month. 58 TH's seal o'er the seal's 58th. Resistance's requiem o'er the requiem's resistance. Kessel's kiss o'er the kiss's kessel. Oppositions or o'er the oar's opposition. Conditions crush. Artillery's arc o'er the arc's artillery. East's echo o'er the echo's east. Ammunition's ache o'er the ache's ammunition. Provision's pall o'er the pall's provision. Suicidal surge o'er the surge's suicidal. Polytruck's prod o'er the prod's polytruck. Rifle's rift o'er the rift's rifle. Unarmed's urn o'er the urn's unarmed. Weapon's wake o'er the wake's weapon. Machine gun's menace o'er the menace's machine gun. NKVD's nest o'er the nest's NKVD. Advance's anvil o'er the anvils. Advance. Penetration's prick o'er the prick's penetration. Purpose's pall o'er the pall's purpose. Body's bloat o'er the bloat's bodies. Decay's dirge o'er the dirge's decay. Ground's gore o'er the gore's ground.